Hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial in the Unreal Engine 5 FPS tutorial series. In this one, what we're going to do is actually a lot of things. We're going to learn how to play a shooting animation, we're going to learn how to spawn a projectile, and then we're going to learn how to play particles when we fire that projectile, and actually make it hit stuff and play more particles then. I would have done a little bit of sound here, like playing a sound and a few other things, but I think we're going to do all those in the next tutorial. So for now, let's just get started on all that animation and particle stuff. Now, to play a shooting animation, naturally we need a shooting action, just like we did for the jumping, the running, and all of the other stuff. So we'll start exactly like we did in a lot of tutorials. We're going to go to the content drawer, and inside of data, I'm going to right click, find input, and create an input action. We'll call this one IA shoot. Don't need to do anything inside of there, but as always, we do need to go to the input mapping context, add a new mapping, use the shoot mapping, and add as an input, we're going to do the left mouse click. That's all we needed to do in there. We're going to have an event for this now. So if we go to the character blueprint, again, that's going to be in core character. In here, I can right click and then search for IA shoot, which is the name of the input action. And inside of this, whenever we trigger it, it's going to call this. How do we play an animation though? Because we naturally do have an animation. So first, let's look for that one. If we go to FPS tutorial, art, assault rifle, and animations, inside of here, we have a fire animation. This is the animation we're going to play. Let's double click on it. You can see that it's a pretty nice fire animation. To play this, all we need to do is, naturally, we're going to do that on the arms. So I'm going to do this the very simple way. We're not going to complicate it a lot. So I'm going to drag the arms. And then inside of this, if I go play animation, that's just going to call a function, which says animation play functions. Now, this will allow us to just play the animation. So find the animation here, fire, and then whenever we trigger, we can just play that animation. If I compile and play and click, you can see that we're playing the fire animation, but it's very shaky. That's because if I hold, it's basically trying to play the animation a million times a second. And you can see that if I print, as always, these events usually get run a lot of times. Yes, you can see that we're trying to play the fire animation a lot of times if this runs. So instead of doing this, we're going to need this to run at an interval. Specifically, it's going to be some sort of fire rate. But before we get into any fire rate, let's try to just figure out how to make this run once when we click. Now, to make it run once, I'm just going to make some space. And the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a do once node. This will allow us to only run this code once. So if I add this node after we trigger, it's going to say completed and then run this. And then the next time it tries to run, it's not going to allow it. So if I compile, go to play, you see if I click, it played it, and then I can't play it anymore. Now let's go back. Obviously, we don't want that. And for that, we have this reset event. So if we plug completed into that, it's going to reset this node and allow us to play it again. This is great for semi-automatic weapons. So if I click and click and click and click, I can keep playing the fire animation, and it looks great. But I can't kind of continue playing it, which for me is not great. So instead of that, as soon as we won't change this. What we will do is whenever we click, when we first click and before we reset, we're going to do a little bit of magic here. The magic we're going to do is I'm going to create a Boolean. Now let's just go here. Let's create B, and it's going to be called holding shoot. And this is going to be a Boolean. So let's make sure we change that. And whenever we first click, I'm going to set holding shoot to true. And after I set holding shoot to true, and this is going to be very weird, I'm going to check if holding shoot is true. Now, it's naturally, the first time it's always going to be true. So if I just check that, this is always going to be true, you might say, because we just set it. But the other thing we're going to do is after we play the animation, we're going to add a node here, and this is called a delay. And the delay, what it does is it waits for a certain amount of time. So after we fire, it's going to wait for a certain amount of time. And then we're going to loop this right back and check again if we're holding shoot. Now that might be a bit odd, but let me just explain this. So let me just show how this works. So if I go here, let me just make this a little nicer because it gets a little messy. It gets a little messy if we just do that. So now every time we start shooting, this is only going to happen once. So just check this out. We trigger. This is only happening once until we let go. It sets holding shoot to true, and then it checks if it's true, which is obviously going to be true. It plays an animation, which is the firing animation. Then we wait for 0.2 seconds, which is going to be a lot, but we wait for that. We go back and we check again. It's still going to be true. And so it's going to keep playing kind of forever. Now, obviously, we don't want that. We would want to stop it whenever we stop holding. So what we need to do is set holding shoot to false and completed. But I do want to show you how this looks. So right now, if I click, it's going to just start shooting and shooting and shooting. I'm not holding, by the way. This is just shooting. But if I re-click, it's going to start shooting again. It's going to be really messy. We don't want that, obviously. So just before you reset this whole thing, make sure you set holding shoot to false right here in completed. And then compile and save. And now if I hold shoot, it's going to fire. And then if I stop, it's going to stop firing. That's basically what it looks like. You can see I really can't do much else. And in fact, this kind of animation setup has broken our animation blueprint, it seems. So we will have to fix that. But as a first contact, this is very nice. We can shoot. Let's fix all the other issues we have, though, because this node seems to override the actual animation blueprint we have. That's not great. So let's figure out how to not do that. Now, usually, the way we would do this, instead of play animation, is we would use a node called, or an action called play montage. What is play montage? Well, it kind of asks us for the same skeletal mesh that the other node did. And then it asks us for a montage to play. What is a montage? Well, a montage is just kind of almost like another layer on top of the animation sequence that we already have that allows us to customize settings like the blend in, the blend out, and we can kind of stack multiple animations and determine a lot of settings. So let's create one of those before we keep messing around with this node. So if I go to the animation we had open and press Control B, it's going to open it. And in here, I'm going to right click on it and click create and create anim montage. I'm going to call this AM FP and whatever else the name is. That stands for animation montage, and I'm going to open it. Now you're going to see it looks exactly the same, except now we have a montage and this thing here called default group, default slot. And in here we have settings, blend option. We have a blend in and a blend out. These are super important if we want to blend animations in and out. For now, I don't really want to mess around with any blending, so I'm just going to set that to 0. Well, let's not do anything else here for now. Now I'm going to click Control B again, just to make sure I have the montage selected, and go back to my character. Inside of here, I'm going to click on this little arrow. You can also find the montage here. And I'm going to replace the play animation call for this play montage call. Now let's just try compiling, saving, and playing. If I click, though, nothing happens. So that's very annoying, but our animation blueprint is working now. Now, for a montage to work, you need to make sure that your animation blueprint at some point implements or mentions the group and the slot of the montage. This is a very specific thing that determines where in the animation blueprint the montage can play. This might not seem very helpful now, but it is helpful in certain situations later on. For now, it is as simple as going to the character animation blueprint, animation graph, and then right at the end, if you want, of the animation graph, it doesn't matter. You can connect a thing here called slot, and that's going to tell us all the different montage slots that we have. In our case, it's only default slot, because that is the default slot. You can see right there, default group dot default slot. Groups here are just the way to organize. You can in fact see it if you click there and then slot manager. You can see that these are all the groups and slots. These are all there by default because of the third person template. You can ignore all of those. We're only going to use the default slot. So let's go back to the animation blueprint. Let's connect that properly. And if I compile and go back to the game and click now, you can see that we are firing, which is great. So now things are working properly. The one issue that I can see here, though, is that every time I fire and I hold and I can like do all of this firing stuff, it feels like it breaks. Yeah, it breaks everything in the animation blueprint. We don't want that. That's because this animation is being played normally, so it's overriding everything else that is happening. Part of the reason is because we put it at the end, so it just kind of ignores all of this and plays itself. That's basically what it does. Now, the way to fix this is to make this animation additive, which will tell the engine that we want to play this over everything else that we're playing. But for that, we need to tell it what exactly it would play over. So for that, we're going to go to the content drawer, find the actual animation sequence, not the montage, for the fire. And inside of here, we can scroll down, go to additive settings, additive anim type, and select local space. And then for base post type, select frame from this animation and just set it to 0. Now this will basically make sure that, well, actually even better than 0, by the way, let's just set it to selected animation frame. And then here, find the idle pose, make sure it's the pose. Now that will tell it that we're only playing keyframes or changes from the idle pose. So whatever is different from the idle pose is going to be played as an additive animation. So for example, if we stayed at the idle pose, we would not be playing anything. So we would still be playing whatever animations come before in the animation blueprint. But in here, we are moving stuff, which is great. And we're going to play just that. So let's go to the animation blueprint. And really, we don't need to do anything else. Once we've set this to local space and made it additive, I can play. Go back here, and you can see that if I shoot and walk, I am still walking. If I aim and shoot, I am still aiming and still shooting, which is great. One other thing that we can do, which I always think is very interesting, since we have a aimed fire animation, by the way, I can now fire while I'm running and do a lot of like wacky stuff. We'll fix all of those. But the first thing we're going to do is fix or add an aiming fire, because this one looks a little bit weird. So to add an aiming fire, I'm going to go to the fire animation blueprint right here. And I'm going to duplicate this slot right here. And instead of this fire, I'm going to click on it. And then here in animation reference, I'm going to find the fire aimed. Now, this, what I did just there, is tell this animation montage that we have 2 animations that we want to play. It's going to tell us that we can't play it on the same slot. All slots must be unique. And for us, this is great. We're going to make another slot for the aiming. And that's the one we're going to use. And we're only going to call that from the aiming state. So it's only going to play there. It's not going to be played anywhere else. So to do all of that, we're going to go to the slot manager. And then inside of here, we're going to add a slot and call it aiming. We'll keep default slot for the default. And then for this fire aimed animation, we're going to select the aiming slot. That will fix the issue. And now in the animation blueprint, what I want to make sure is that, first of all, I don't keep this here, because if I kept this here and then I added another slot before it, it would play the same animation twice, especially because it's additive. And we do not want that. So I'm going to unhook that, Control X that, just so we can grab it with us. And then I'm going to go to whatever is not the aiming animation. In our case, that's both the idle and the crouch. So right here. And that messed it up a little bit. Sorry. And right after that, I'm going to place this default slot. So you can see if I compile now, this is before the aiming check. So it's going to happen on everything but the aiming. If I go here, I can shoot. And then if I aim, I can't shoot. And in fact, if I shoot and aim, it's going to transition to a non-shooting state. That's kind of partly what we want, because inside of aiming, right here in the aim or walk loop, right after this, we're going to want to add a different slot. In our case, I can copy and paste this. And instead of default slot, we're going to use that aiming slot that we created before. So that will ensure that aiming montages play right after this and nowhere else. So if we save, Control-Shift-S, and then play. Now, if I shoot, it's going to play the normal shooting. And then if I aim and shoot, it's going to play an aiming shooting, which is really good. One issue we might have here, though, and you might notice, is that it's the same thing that we had before is happening. If I shoot and walk, the walking kind of stops. And that is because the aiming fire is still not additive. So let's go back to the content browser, find the fire aimed, open it, additive anim type, local space, and then selected animation frame. And then instead of the idle pose here though, find the aim pose. And I'm going to show you why. If I select the idle pose right here and save, if I try to play now, you're going to see that it's going to move the same amount that the aim moves from the idle pose, because it's only applying changes to the pose we added there. So it's going to look really odd. We don't want that. We want it to only apply the changes to the aim pose, because that's where we're starting. So let's change that to aim pose. Now if I go here and shoot, you can see that I can walk and shoot and jump and do whatever else I want, and everything is working correctly. And in fact, we have kind of a fire rate for an automatic rifle, which is great. I can also do a lot of other stuff, but just ignore all of that for now. Great. Okay, so now that we have that, one other thing that I'm going to do, I will remove this play animation node. I'm going to make sure that this looks a little bit better. And we're going to make a sort of value that we can control for this instead of keeping it in the code. So I'm going to promote this to a variable, and let's just say fire delay. This is not how you would usually do, but we'll just start with this. And fire delay is just the delay it takes for us to be able to fire again. So for instance, if it's set to 0.2, it's going to fire like we saw before. If I set it to 0.05 and compile, and I hold shoot, you're going to see that it's going to be very quick. So that is very odd. So let's not do that. I'm going to set it to 0.15, for example, and then compile. Well, that's basically kind of an assault rifle. Awesome. Now, our next step. Our next step is really to just create a projectile and spawn some particles and then have it shoot out and do all of that really cool stuff. Let's just start by creating the projectile itself. I can do that by going to the content drawer, going to core, right-clicking, going blueprint, blueprint class, and then clicking on actor. I'm going to call this one BP bullet. Inside of bullet, I'm going to go to components and add a projectile movement component. This is the component that's pretty much just going to make the projectile move, so it's going to just make everything easier for us. One other thing I'm going to do, though, just so we see it, I'm going to add a sphere, and I'm going to make the sphere the root of this component. And I think with this, and I might be wrong here because I haven't done projectiles in quite a while, I think with this we should mostly have things working. We might have to mess around with the settings a little bit, but let's just move on from the projectile itself for now, and let's spawn it when we shoot and have it kind of move forward after. So to spawn this, we will go to character, and when we shoot, I'm going to spawn this blueprint. For now, I'll just spawn it somewhere near the character, and we'll test the shooting functionality, and we'll get to more specifics after. So to spawn something, you really just right-click and then type spawn, and the first thing that's going to show up is spawn actor from class. So just click on that action. Just put it right after the montage, not after the delay, by the way, otherwise you'll see very weird things. And select for the class, let's search for the class we created, which is bullet. And for the transform, let's just say the camera's transform is going to suffice for now. So get world transform, get world transform for the camera. And this will be what we will use. So this will just spawn the projectile at the camera's location. And we don't need to do anything else with that. And also make sure you connect this back to the delay. So if I play now and shoot, you can see that we're spawning the projectile. It is not moving though, so we do need to fix that. And it also doesn't have any physics, which is another thing we will fix. But to start, we are spawning it, which is great. Now, let's go to the bullet, our bullet projectile, and inside of projectile movement, I think one thing we need to do is set the initial speed. So let's just set it to 100, for example. That does not seem to be moving still. Let's try a higher value. Maybe this is working, but we just need a higher value. It is not. We actually do not have it working. We might have to simulate physics on that. Yes. Okay, so we do need to simulate physics. So do remember to click on the sphere and then go to physics, simulate physics. That is very important. Let's go back to the projectile movement. I was not confident about that. I'll tell you that much. I haven't created a projectile in a while. We've had the projectiles in our projects created a long time ago. I also changed now the initial speed to something a little bit lower just so we don't have a super fast projectile. You can see that it is colliding with the character and it's kind of shooting up a little bit. But we have some sort of projectile. Now, it is a bit slow now, as a matter of fact, so maybe I went a little too small there. I'm just going to go like 5,000 maybe. There you go. That feels like a projectile of some sort. Now, let's not have it collide with the character. That feels a little bit weird, because sometimes it kind of shoots off just very randomly. So instead of that, we will have this projectile ignore the player character. And the way to do that is I'm just going to grab this, and then I think we just need to get the sphere itself. And then you can call ignore actor when moving. And the actor itself is going to be self, meaning this actor, so the character. And we'll connect this right after. And should ignore should be true. Make this a little nicer. And let's also move this to the right so we don't have any weird stretching here. And let's compile and save. And if I shoot now, you can see that we don't get any weird colliding. Actually, we do at times, oddly enough, but I think this has mostly fixed it. I believe we're colliding maybe with the weapon. We might be colliding with the weapon as well. But for now, this should do. So let's just also, by the way, here, let's just click always spawn, ignore collisions. Let's make sure we always spawn the bullets. As you can see, we have bullets with gravity and they bounce around and they do a lot of stuff. It's pretty good. One more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to class defaults here, and at the bottom pretty much, there is a thing. We should find it. It's almost I believe a time of some sort. Maybe did they remove this in Unreal Engine 5? Oh no, they didn't. It's called initial lifespan. We're going to change this to 5, for example, and this is going to determine the amount of time this object stays alive for. Because we don't really want that bullet to kind of always exist. So if we look at it, it's eventually going to despawn. Even if you don't look at it, by the way, all of these will eventually despawn. And that's great because we don't want to clutter the entire engine with millions of projectiles, unhinged shooting of projectiles. Great. The next step for us now is going to be adding a muzzle flash of some sort. It's not really going to look very good because we don't have any real particles in the project that help for this, but we do have one thing. If I look in the content drawer, in the starter content particles folder, we have this explosion effect. So we're going to use this for a few things. One of them is going to be the muzzle flash. So if I go to the particle system here and reset it, that's what it looks like. So really all I'm going to do is I'm going to spawn this at the weapon's tip whenever we shoot. So we're going to apply exactly the same knowledge we have from just spawning the bullet. So I'm going to go to character. I'm going to copy the spawn actor right here. As a matter of fact, you can just copy all of this for now just so we can look at it. And just tuck it up, all of that right here. You can't spawn the particle directly through this. So instead of spawn actor, actually, just use spawn particle, spawn emitter at location. I believe this is a particle system. Yes. So we can use that to spawn the explosion. So just select it right there. And then instead of the spawn actor, sorry, that's my bad with the spawn actor. Instead of the spawn actor, we're going to use this. And then we will use still the camera's world transform. I'm just going to split it into and only take the location. And you can ignore basically every other setting for now. I'm just going to keep right all of that. And then compile, save, and let's see what happens. Now that is a super big explosion that looks quite odd. One thing we can do is, first of all, place it a little different, but also attach it to the camera or to the weapon itself in some way. So let's start doing that, because if we don't attach it, it's just going to kind of stay in the air. But before we attach it, let's just place it a little bit better. So to place it a little bit better, instead of the camera's location, I'm going to get our equipped weapons location. And to do that, we haven't done this in a while, I know, but to do that, our equipped weapons array contains our equipped weapon at whatever equipped weapon index we're at. So to get that, I'm just going to call get, and then use the index to get exactly that actor. And I'm going to get actor location for this, and then spawn the particle at that location. We will still have some issues here. It's still going to look a little weird, but it's going to look better. We might need to move it forward. So I can, for example, take get actor forward, just like we did earlier with line traces, and take the location plus the forward, and then the forward times some sort of amount, like 300. And then apply this as the location. And now you barely see it. I think the forward of the blueprint might not be correct now that I'm noticing. As a matter of fact, if I click on it, I believe it indeed is not correct. We're working with the right forward. So instead of get actor forward, we will use get actor right vector, and then still multiply by all those. And now you're going to see that we have particles. They're very far from the muzzle though, so maybe instead of spawning them that far, we're going to spawn them closer. Compile. And now that's actually a lot closer. Now I can really kind of see all that. They are very big though, so maybe we can also make them a little bit smaller. Let's change the scale to something like 0.5 and compile. And then the last issue we have, and this one is very obvious, is that we are spawning this kind of not attached to the muzzle. So it looks very odd when it fades away, because it fades away in midair, just very far. So let's fix that. Instead of using spawn emitter at location to fix that, we can call spawn emitter attached, and that's going to ask us for a lot of other things, but we can just ignore most of them. Just drag the pins, connect the location, make sure everything here is kind of set to the same, set the scale to 0.5 just like we were doing before, set the emitter to the not the fire emitter, the explosion emitter. We can close that one, and then it's going to ask us for attached to component. Now, the component, we don't have a specific component. We have an actor, which is the weapon, but we can get the root component for that. So get root component, and we can just attach to that. And that's already going to be a lot better. If I compile and save, it's going to be really far for some reason at the moment. And the reason really is because we're keeping relative offset here. So instead of that, I will just proceed to type or to click here, snap to target, keep, or just including scale, really, because we're not scaling anything. And we still do not see it. So let's just remove the location for now, just to see it be at 0. Okay, that is correct. And now instead of doing all of this, we can just set its location maybe to 100 on all axes. As a matter of fact, just on the right axis, which is forward for it. Now we are snapped to it. Yep, now we are snapped. So now you can see that we have a very interesting firing particle, which is very big. I will continually just make this a lot smaller. In my case, it's going to be 0.2 maybe, hopefully. Yeah. And now we have it at 0.2, which looks a lot better. Still very weird. Maybe even 0.1 or 0.08 might be better. I mean, again, this is not a particle that was made for this, so just bear with me here. Yeah, there we go. That is looking rather interesting. Sometimes we're firing super off in the distance. That is probably partly due to collision somehow. And it might actually have to do with the gun. But for now, this is how we'll leave it. We got a particle. We have a weapon. It only really fires weirdly whenever we move. We'll fix that for next tutorial. For now, we already have a lot of things kind of in there. So you can fire while you're aiming, you can hold fire, you're getting a lot of projectiles. Maybe one last thing that we can do before I leave it there, I'm going to add this impact also when the particles hit things, just for the sake of having a giggle here. If I go to the bullet and then the event graph, I click on sphere and scroll down, there is an on component hit right here. If I press this, it's going to give us an event that gets called whenever the sphere hits something. So let's see if that works. If I print, compile, it is not working, so that is very interesting. Let's read what it says. This could happen due to character movement or physics simulation. For events when objects overlap, see the overlap event. For collisions during physics simulations, click on Simulate Generate Hit Events, enable that. So we need to enable Simulate Generate Hit Events. So let's go to Class Defaults, Simulate, okay, maybe not here, on the sphere. Simulation generates hit events. So let's make sure we enable that, compile, go back, and now when it does hit something, it really gives us a lot of things. We're definitely not going to spawn an effect every time that happens. So instead of that, we're only going to do this once. So same node we used before, the do once. And we're going to copy exactly the same setup we had here. So spawn emitter, but it's not going to be spawn emitter attached. We're just going to spawn it in the world. So spawn emitter at location. And just for kind of to make it more interesting, I'm not going to spawn the same emitter. Let's just use sparks, for example. And the location is going to be the actor's location whenever we hit this. So just type get actor location. We don't need to do much with the rotation or anything of that sort. Let's just use that. So you can see that now we are spawning particle effects every time we hit something, or at least the first time we hit something. And this will actually make it very clear that we are hitting the character. So we do need to fix that, obviously. We do see that issue. But it is working. So we'll fix the one issue we have with the character in the next tutorial. But for now, I hope that was enjoyable. Have a really good one.